Getting to our most interesting teams of the NBA offseason on today's episode of the Just Basketball Show. But before we do that, Wes Goldberg, I got a question for you to kick us off. It appears, you can never be certain with the Cleveland Cavaliers, but that they are moving toward hiring Kenny Atkinson to be the next head coach, replacing JB Bickerstaff. That would mean that we have had 6 head coach hirings already. 7 would be the Cleveland job. And we still have Detroit. So we're looking at more than a quarter of the league getting a new head coach from, and if you go back to Doc Rivers, it's even more. So my question for you, between Atkinson, Doc Rivers, Jordy Fernandez, Charles Lee, Mike Budenholzer, Brian Keefe, J.J. Redick, which of those coaches will have the biggest impact on their team? Who do you think will do the best job, get their team to where they want to be the best?
Well, you can look at this 2 ways, right? We can ask this short term, we can ask this long term as well. I do think that either way, the answer might just be Charles Lee, and the reason I hesitate to go long term on Charles Lee, the short term argument is he's been one of the most sought after assistant coaches in the league for a few years now, and the Charlotte Hornets did their due diligence. They fired their coach early, and they went after and got the guy that they wanted, and we knew that it was going to be Charles Lee for a while, right? Yeah. Even during the NBA Finals. And I think you see some of the parts that he has to work with LaMelo Ball, Brandon Miller, the 6th pick in this draft, Mark Williams, who I still like, and it sounds like they still like him too. There's definitely some stuff to work with there, and it just feels like a team that has had no vision for such a long time. And if Charles Lee brings in 50% of the vision that the Boston Celtics were working with, then that's a lot more vision than the Charlotte Hornets have had for a long time. So I think maybe the answer there is him. The only reason I hesitate to go long-term is I still just don't necessarily trust what that front office is doing. I know it's a relatively newer front office and everything like that, but there's just not been a whole lot of proof of concept there. Can they actually build the team around LaMelo and Brandon Miller? How much do we trust LaMelo to be the face of the franchise? All these things. There's definitely some other long-term questions, but if Charles Lee has been this sought after as an assistant coach, then I think the right answer has to be him.
Yeah, I'll give my answer. It's also just crazy to look at these cycles. In 2022, only 2 coaches were hired. This year, like I said, we're gonna be at 8 if you include Doc. So, and then 2023, it was like heavy hitter after heavy hitter. You got Nick Nurse, you got Ime Udoka back, you got Quinn Snyder. You have obviously the whole situation with Missoula becomes like the full-time coach technically after the season. He already had the job. And then this year, it feels like it's another cycle, maybe similar to like the 21-22 range, where it's these assistants who we've kind of known were coming, getting their opportunities. So right. I want to say Jordy Fernandez, frankly. I just think Brooklyn's situation is so bleak. But Fernandez is similar to Charles Lee. He's a guy we've known for a very long time, he was going to be one of the next ones, right? And he goes overseas to get experience. He's bounced around in a lot of different NBA situations. It seems like his X's and O's are very well respected. He's had times where he's kind of responsible for the defensive end, sometimes on the offensive end, and very well respected and everything else. I'm invested in him because I think he's the type of guy NBA teams should be treating more seriously with the all the stuff he's done. Mm-hmm. But the Nets, I mean, would we be surprised if they sucked again? Or if they're even worse, frankly, even if he's a good coach? I don't know. So my answer is going to be Coach Bud. That's my answer.
Coach Bud is a good answer. That's a very fair answer. I guess my thing with Fernandez is like, why did you even take that job? Is it just so that you could live in New York? There's no other real reason. If you were the sought-after coach, I know there's only 30 of these jobs, but come on. I don't know.
Brooklyn,
so to your point, he might end up being great long-term, but the short-term is going to be a little rough.
Exactly. They keep their guys. I'll say that, right? Like Sean Marks has had his job through like 6 different iterations of what this team has looked like. They kept Steve Nash longer than I think most people expected, and maybe like only by a month because he got fired in the middle of that season. But Jacques Vaughn was here forever, so maybe it's just, hey, even if this season is bad, it's not going to be like Wes Unseld in Washington or something where I'm just out immediately, even though the situation was awful. Like I'm going to have some time here, but yeah, I don't know if I would have taken that if I was him and had my pick of the litter. But regardless, all of it is very uncertain. It could be Brian Keefe for all we know. We have no idea with this stuff. It tends to be all about circumstance and everything else. But interesting that we're getting so many of these new guys, and it'll be fascinating to see heading into next season. But let's get to our most interesting teams of the NBA offseason. Wes and I are going to draft the teams that we think are going to be right in the middle of everything, the teams we're most curious to see the direction that they go, all coming up next. Welcome into the Just Basketball Show for Monday, June 24th. I'm Brendon Kleen. That over there is Wes Goldberg. We are here to start off another week. We're here for you 3 times a week, giving you a dose of all things hoops, Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. If you're finding us for the first time, hit follow or subscribe on your favorite podcast app. We're free and available everywhere, including YouTube. You can also check us out on social media. We're posting exclusive content on TikTok, Instagram, and X. Catch up on the NBA. Get our analysis across all of those channels as well. Support for today's episode of the Just Basketball Show comes from BetMGM. If you haven't signed up for BetMGM yet, use the bonus code JustBasketball to get started, and you will get up to a $1,500 first bet offer on your first wager with BetMGM. Here's how it works. Step 1. Download the BetMGM Sportsbook app on iOS or Android and sign up using the code JustBasketball. Step 2. Deposit at least $10 and place your first wager on any game. Step 3, you will receive up to $1,500 back in bonus bets if that bet loses. Just make sure to use the bonus code JustBasketball when you sign up. Disclaimer, gambling problem, call 1-800-GAMBLER, must be 21 or older to wager. Terms and conditions apply. All right. Wes, we're going to do this as a draft, I think, just to be a little bit more competitive about it, debate it out. We're going to try to basically order from top to bottom the teams that, at least I approached it as maybe flying a little bit under the radar. We're going to get to some of the obvious ones as well, but who has the most interesting offseason ahead of them as we enter draft week and things really start to heat up? So I'll give you the first pick. Who is your most interesting team of the NBA offseason?
Well, I'm glad you said under the radar because I do feel like this one has flown under the radar despite the guy calling the shots, very blatantly saying we're going to make big changes this summer, and it's the New Orleans Pelicans. I think that this team is fascinating for so many different reasons, from a salary cap standpoint, from where they stand, some of the free agent decisions that they have, some of the trade decisions that they have, but more than anything, more than even the Brandon Ingram part of this, I was fascinated by what this team could be last year. There was moments during the season where the Pelicans looked like a title contender, right? And when Zion Williamson is playing like a top 10 guy, which he has for probably a couple different spurts over his career, it just feels like everything is possible with this team. And then, something will go bad, Zion will get hurt, and then it feels like nothing's possible for this team. So trying to figure out what direction they're going to go in with Zion and how to build around Zion, because of as unique and incredible of a talent he is, he's not the easiest player to build around either. It's a little complicated because he doesn't even have the size of a guy like Giannis. So even that kind of stuff, you do have to take certain things off the table in that way and whatever. I thought the Pelicans were really vulnerable when they didn't know what center they wanted to close with, how they wanted to close games. Were they going to play with Zion at center? Was it Larry Nance Jr., who ended up being the Josh Giddey of that team, essentially, with teams just not playing off of him from three-point range? Jonas Valanciunas couldn't hold up defensively at the end of these games. He was just getting attacked in pick and roll and things like that, and also a free agent. So I think they have some decisions to make internally of what is the best version of our team built around Zion look like, and what kind of players do we need around him? And that, to me, is the first kind of thing they have to figure out. And then they have this great trade chip in Brandon Ingram, who is on an expiring contract, going to be up for an extension. All indications is that he's out of there. They're going to elevate Herb Jones and Trey Murphy into the starting lineup, which makes a whole lot of sense around Zion. We at least know that works. So you got this great trade chip and up to 6 first-round picks that you're going to be able to play with to figure out, okay, what's the player that we need in the front court next to Zion? And maybe we use Brandon Ingram to go get that player. Griffin's also kind of said that he wants to look for scoring upgrade. Is CJ McCollum the long-term answer there in the backcourt? Obviously, he's not. You could find some options there. Where does Dyson Daniels fit in, et cetera? But to me, that first question of how we build around Zion and then how do we use Brandon Ingram to go get that player is fascinating to me, partly because I don't know the answer to it. I just don't. And that to me is kind of the interesting part of where do they land on that?
Yeah, so not to throw cold water on the Pelicans immediately because they're going to get a lot done. They've been very upfront about that, as you said. So I expect them to be active. They'll be one of the teams we're talking about the most. But I don't think they're going to get all of that done right now. I just don't think it's possible, right? I have a hard time imagining, like, let's just start with CJ McCollum. I kind of just think he's going to be on the team next year. I think that the amount of money that he makes, the fact that they already are having to have negotiations with Brandon Ingram, teams that want him, could they end up bringing him back and just kind of eating it? Like, to have a very similar thing play out with McCollum, who has another year on his deal, even though it does decrease, he's going to be there. I think, can they really upgrade at center and point guard and, so I feel like it's sort of where I'm looking with them is the Ingram deal. What's the best that they can get?
Right.
And then how do they make some of their other moves, which could just be about who's playing more or less on that's already on the roster, to look more like a Zion Williamson team, like you said. The interesting thing with the Zion side of it is, even though he had his best season last year for sure, he looked more like a wing than I think we thought he would when he got drafted 5 years ago, right? Like, even the best defensive moments that we finally saw him crack and show us, it wasn't blocking threes like he was doing at Duke, playing small ball center, all the biggest dreams we might have had. And maybe that's coming. I don't know. The league's a lot different. A 6'6" guy playing center is probably unreasonable at this point in the first place. But I guess my question is he even a 4 on defense, or is he really like a 3? And that, again, is starting to get into, how do you build this roster? Williamson, Jones, and Trey Murphy III together on the court, +5 net rating last year. Pretty nice. So that's a good starting point. On the Ingram side, this kind of is a good place to start, honestly, because one of the things that I think is going to be interesting this offseason is, and I've heard some Cap people who are smarter than me on this stuff continue to harp on it, is there's a lot of teams, whether you look at, obviously, New Orleans, who we're talking about, but also Cleveland, potentially with any of their non-Evan Mobley guys who, we're pretty certain aren't going to be traded, but potentially could be. The Lakers are buyers. We know Jimmy Butler might be on the way out. The Paul George situation is uncertain. But a lot of those teams that I just mentioned are going to be wanting players back for what they're giving up. And the Pelicans fall in that camp too. There's not a lot of teams who are potentially going to be getting rid of their star who are trying to blow it up or just get a package of picks and young players back. So can the Pelicans even find a deal that keeps them competitive and gets them some of those chips to build a more Zion-centered team for Ingram? Is that type of package even there for them, is my question.
I don't know that they want that. Okay. I think they do want the player back. I think that's what they're looking for. I don't know that they necessarily even need. If your idea is that we're going to trade Brandon Ingram from a star for a star player, I think you're probably not working with the right hypothesis, right? Like, Brandon Ingram is something less than a star.
Well, I'm saying Ingram is kind of the star, and they're the ones selling him off to try to get, can they do a deal like OG Anunoby and the Raptors? I think that's kind of what they would want to do, but who's out there to do that with them? That's what I'm saying. Yeah.
I think you and I are saying the same thing too, and and again, it's what position are we looking for? What do we want? That to me is the hard part. And so, if I'm the Pelicans, and this is something I've been playing around with, and I'm not, this is more half-baked than I'm totally making a strong stance here, and I kind of wanted to bounce this idea off of you, is because I agree with you. How Zion played last year was much closer to a wing than even like a power forward or a center and all these things. And I actually thought Willie Green did a great job empowering him to be the guy bringing the ball up. And that was, I think, criticized pretty roundly at first because it was so rough. I don't know what people expect. If you're openly trying something new and it doesn't work for the first month, and people are like, this isn't working. It's like, well, it wasn't supposed to. It's been a month and it's new. It wasn't supposed to work, but we need this to happen so that he can grow into the player we need him to grow into. And by the end of the year, I thought he was doing his best playmaking he's ever done in his career. And I think if you keep going down that path, that might be the right path for Zion. And is he just a supersized jumbo point guard? And do you build around him the way that the Mavericks have built around Luka? and you say, well, we just need length and defense around him, a secondary ball handler to help him out, and some size in the front court where we have some real rim protection because he's just not that player. And with Zion, the defensive stuff is going to be hit or miss. Some nights he's going to look dominant and great, where he's got a much higher ceiling than obviously Luka does on that end. But other nights he's just not going to be that engaged, and that's okay. So I would be looking for that rim rolling center, a real rim protector who can basically cover up all the deficiencies that this team has defensively. Because you look at their strengths defensively with Herb Jones and Trey Murphy, they could switch and guard every position 1 through 4. Herb Jones can guard 5s if they need him to, but that's what I'd be looking for. So I think the trade that's been out there is the Brandon Ingram for Jared Allen thing. Who knows what Cleveland wants to do? Maybe we'll talk about them a little later, but they're like the team that could be interesting that just doesn't want to be. It just, from all the reports, are like, no, we actually, all the 4 guys that can't really play together, we're just gonna run that. We're gonna run that back. We're pretty comfortable with it. And yeah, we don't even have a coach yet to make these decisions, but that's fine. So I don't know. That to me seems like the guy that makes a little bit of sense. But if you can't get him, is there a sign and trade for Nick Claxton? Is there something there for Isaiah Hartenstein or whatever it is? I don't know. But those would be some of the things I'd be looking at.
Yeah, I think you're right. But the part of the issue is, like a lot of these teams, I mean, frankly, even Dallas, right? Like, they were playing Kleba at the 5 despite us being so infatuated with the Gafford and Lively acquisitions. It feels like that type of center, we're kind of like remembering how important it is, but also it can't be your only option. And so like they're in a tough spot because they don't really have any centers that you feel great about in a postseason environment right now. They might need like 2 cracks at that. So again, that's kind of why I'm like, is it all going to happen this summer, or is next year when maybe they finally get like a 6 seed and maybe they win a round, or maybe they really push, and it's unfortunate that they're so far behind and it'll be year 6 for Zion and they're only at that point in their build, but that might be a more reasonable goal. But
that's why I think I don't expect them to get it all done this year, but this is an important pivot point. Like, this is where you choose the direction you're going to go in, and you sort of lay the foundation to do all the things that you need to do over the next couple of years.
I like Atlanta. I don't know what they're gonna do, but Capella. Well, that's not my next team, but that's just for Ingram. I'll go to my next team in a second. But just one last idea on the Pelicans trade front. It's like, if they keep one of their guards, but they want to remain competitive, could that be a place that you look? I'd be pushing for
Okongwu if I was the Pelicans.
Yeah, Okongwu. They have some other younger wing guys you could potentially get kind of multiple for one, and I could see a world where if they want to, I like them to take a little bit of a step back, but everybody keeps reminding us they don't have their picks for the next few years. So if they're kind of trying to do 2 things at once, maybe that makes some sense, but I'm not sure. All right, my next team, my first team in our most interesting of the offseason, Houston Rockets. We'll stay in the West. We'll stay in the can they take a step forward group, kind of in the middle of the Western Conference. Picks 3 and 44 in the draft. I think obviously 3 being the real way that they're going to work their way into the headlines and news cycle here to start things off West. But also Alperen Şengün eligible for an extension. You have Fred VanVleet basically already expiring if they want him to be. He has that team option on the last year of his contract. So, when you hear Reed Shepherd being named as a potential target at 3 and things, I know that seems odd, but they're already kind of having to plan for, is VanVleet going to be on our team beyond that? Could we decline the option and give him an extension at less money? Like, what's the whole situation going to be? They're also being connected with Donovan Clingan a lot, which doesn't make a lot of sense to me. And that's part of why they've just kind of been on my mind, is I'm like, would they, after, the Steven Adams thing that they do, they allegedly wanted Brook Lopez. Now they're targeting Clingan. I'm not fully following what their plan is there. It feels like that would just be sort of creating a logjam by choice, but maybe they just really want that 1 through 48 minutes. We're going to have a center. We're going to have defense. I don't know. But of course, layered on top of all of that is they were the most desperate, aggressive team last offseason. Do they still feel that level of pressure? And are they one of the surprise teams that tries to go out and get a massive improvement on the trade market and really be a surprise player in the sweepstakes for any of these stars that were kind of, maybe they will, maybe they won't be available? And I think more than anyone else, I'll just say it, like, Jimmy Butler has the connection there. I'm not saying they're going to be the best trade partner for the Heat, but that's kind of where my mind goes, is if they really want to get involved in something like that, they obviously have the assets to do it, and I wouldn't be surprised given how much we know Tillman Fertitta has pushed since they lost Harden.
I love the Houston Rockets as the most interesting team of the offseason because there's real team building like strategy things here, right? Like, how do you build around Alperen Sengun? Can he really be your Nikola Jokic and all these things, the way that they're talking about him? You've got so many interesting young players, from Jalen Green to Jabari Smith Jr. to Tari Eason, the Thompsons, all these guys that you've got coming off the bench, and Cam Whitmore, all these interesting players. Where do you fit them in? You've got the Dylan Brooks and the Fred VanVleet veteran factors on the roster already. You've got really chunky tradable contracts, even from like a Jock Landale and a Jeff Green and these other guys that are on the roster. It's like, well, we can kind of move these things and turn it into something. You've got the number 3 pick in this draft. From all the team building asset stuff, like, their whole world is open. And yet, obviously, the smartest thing to do would be to just take somebody at number 3, take another bite at the apple, keep building around all these great, talented young players that we all like, and just chill. And yet you've got this ownership edict saying, we're not chilling, we're going for it. The hell with the future. We need to make the playoffs right now for some weird reason. And the number one job for an executive, for a front office executive, a general manager in charge of building a roster, is not to build a championship roster. That's not the number one job. The number one job for all these guys is to keep the job. And if you want to keep your job, you better make your owner happy. And so all these things that we think that they should do, they might just not do it because the guy that's in charge of it is just trying to keep his job, because there is this immense amount of pressure from your boss to make the playoffs. And so they're so interesting for so many different reasons. And what kind of star do they go out and get? I have been making the Jimmy Butler connection forever. It is so easy. Jimmy Butler from Houston would get along with Ime Udoka a ton. Would like a lot of the veteran players on that roster. Makes a lot of sense from just, frankly, what they need on that team, too. Do they go out and do it? Because they have all the things that they would need. They have not even just one package. They have several versions of several different packages that they could offer Miami. And if the Heat made the decision eventually to just say, you know what, we can't give Jimmy Butler that much money. The Houston Rockets are desperate enough to do it. They're fine with it. We can't credibly do it and feel good about it. So we're going to have to explore some trades. Whether it's Philadelphia that's offering 3 first-round picks and the cap flexibility, whether it's maybe it's the Warriors who have been rumored with like a Kuminga-based package and some picks or whatever it is. Houston could beat every one of those packages like with one hand tied behind their back. And if they really wanted to make that move, they could. And so that it feels like a realistic option for them if, again, the Heat end up kind of coming to this crossroads. Besides Jimmy Butler, I don't really know what the other star is for them. Like a Brandon Ingram doesn't make sense for them. They want that guy that's really going to take them up that notch, and Brandon Ingram might be more of he's not like a ceiling raiser at all, or even a floor raiser. It feels like Jimmy Butler could be that player, but I don't really know who else that player would be.
Yeah, a lot of the other guys seem to be guards, right? So they probably don't need that. At least not, if Mitchell's not available, they don't need a point guard, I should say. If VanVleet was solid, he makes a lot of sense with Şengün. It felt like he really was a culture setter and got along with Udoka as well. And they've just paid him. They're not going to want to replace him or trade him away. So yeah, part of it is we're not exactly positive who all could end up being available throughout all this. But I don't know. Like, would it be insane if they had a conversation on a sign and trade with the Clippers for Paul George? I don't know. Like that's sort of why I brought them up, is they just feel like such a wild card, given that they were just so over the top with everything last summer, and we kind of just seem to have forgotten about them a little bit. But I honestly love, Wes, that we started with these two teams. I think these are the two teams, they were basically eliminated by the time you started doing the podcast, but that I am over the moon in love with, that Chris has never bought in on. So the fact that we're able to start with New Orleans and Houston just warms my heart. I'm a fervent believer in Alperen Şengün. I had him as an all-star last year when we did our all-star picks. I feel like his defense is much better than, not much, it's better than the Jokic or the Sabonis comps that he gets. I think he actually has the ability to kind of move his feet and protect the rim at a little bit of a higher level than those guys do, especially considering he's younger than them, of course. So I just think this team is, plus they unlock some small ball stuff when they when he got hurt, and Jabari
Well, can I
Smith was
ask you
playing
about that?
center, and it just feels like they have all the talent that they need. They're ready to make a run. I feel like. Yeah, ask me.
So us being two really big Houston Rockets fans here, obviously. The whole small ball thing was interesting when Sengun got hurt at the end of the year, and they've got Jalen Green with Jabari Smith at center, and Jalen Green really flourished. And it feels like there should be a version where Jalen Green and Sengun are the next Jamal Murray Jokic, like that they could work out this 2-man game partnership. But it's never been there, even like really a little bit. And they do tend to play better when the other one's not on the court. And it's still too early to me. I'd rather be late on this stuff than early. But I would give it another chance. I wouldn't be like rushing to get off of Jalen Green. But all the reporting around Houston was even at the deadline that Jalen Green could be more available than people thought. And so I think if you had to pick one, it's obviously Sengun. But in terms of just like the vision of where the team should be going, like what do you think the Houston Rockets should be doing? Because I guess to answer my own question before I even let you answer it, I thought everybody kind of looked at are they actually better with Jabari Smith at center over Sengun? Is that really the future? And I'm like, that's more of like that was to me a great development is, now we just know how we want to play when Şengün's not on the court. Like maybe you don't need a traditional backup center. Maybe it's like
but they seem to think they do, which is also what complicates it because they've been so determined to get another center on the roster.
Unless the whole Kleen stuff is a smokescreen to get somebody to try to trade up.
But they very much for sure had an offer on the table for Brook Lopez, and he just wanted to go back to Milwaukee. So I don't fully get it.
To them maybe not seeing how ready Şengün was. That was like maybe Şengün just needs a year to kind of get groomed, and maybe having Brook Lopez in front of him is insurance in that. It would be interesting to see if Brook Lopez is available this year, if they kind of circle back on that Brook Lopez idea. That would be weird. I'm hoping that they don't. I hope they realize that Şengün's just fine at center and they don't need that. So, but who knows?
To answer your question, I mean, I think that the Rockets, it kind of feels like they have what they need, to be honest with you. Like, I guess Jabari Smith to me is a little bit of an interesting part of this because he really is sort of like similar to what we were talking about with Zion. I think Jabari is a wing who happens to be really tall. Mm-hmm. So he's not exactly this sort of secondary rim protector that you're going to put next to Şengün and have that kind of, Aaron Gordon to your Jokic per se. I feel like he is, and even Aaron Gordon's not exactly that, but, like if they could have Draymond Green next to Şengün, that would be perfect, but it's not that. So that's the part where it gets a little bit complicated is like, how do you kind of piece together you have a lot of wing talent, you have a lot of defensive, I think, potential in your perimeter players, but how do you sort of meld that with the limitations that, of course, Şengün is always going to have? That's kind of, I think, the question. But having a coach like Udoka to help do that is obviously great. I could see I understand the idea of if you can get Şengün to maybe take more threes, to be a dribble handoff facilitator, things like that. To have another big option, it's not the craziest. I guess just with Klingon, it's like if he has his eyes on potentially going first overall and he goes from that to I'm backing up an all-star, that feels like you're just asking for some problems for two guys who have a lot of pride and everything. But I love Cam Whitmore. I love Amen Thompson. I think that shooting would be the only other thing to mention here. They need, and that's maybe where Jimmy doesn't make a ton of sense. It's interesting because Philly and Houston are two places he might end up that don't have an absolute ton of shooting to help him out or to maximize what you want for Butler. So that would be something to figure out. Fred VanVleet, again, going to a team where he's the only guy who's a high-volume shooter, just destined to just be launching threes off the bounce and being the only modern player on his team, so to speak. But, yeah, I think the Rockets are going to do something. If nothing else, they'll have the third overall pick, but I think they're going to do more. And they also have some other, Jayshawn Tate's a free agent. They have some other kind of interesting decisions, too, that could be ripple effects. So there we go. All right, what's your next pick in our most interesting offseason teams mini draft here?
Well, we did the thing we had to do. We got on here as NBA nerds, talked about a couple of small market teams with youth and the need for a vision. So mission accomplished. But now it's
honestly,
time to go
Houston
big market,
fans might be bothered that you're doing that to them. I mean, that's like
small market thing,
fourth biggest city in the country.
Yeah,
they just have a weird fan base.
No, you're right, and we do that here in Miami too. We're like, we're not small market. So I'm going, but big market, big global footprint here. I'm going with the Golden State Warriors.
Yeah.
And they're interesting for a few reasons, obviously, because you've got the legacy of Steph Curry, the legacy of their big three with Steph, Draymond, and Klay Thompson. Is Klay going to stay there? All these things. I think they're also interesting because of their young players, and if they do try to make some sort of big move here to reopen the Steph Curry window, those other, like the players they have on their roster currently could kind of spread to other places in the league and make impacts somewhere else. Like, what does Jonathan Kuminga look like on a young team that where he's able to grow and play through his mistakes and kind of learn through that? Can Moses Moody actually be a functionally good, consistently good basketball player somewhere else where there's some opportunity? Is Brandon Podziemski, as good as he was for last year with the Warriors, is he sort of like the hardest player to part with of that group, and can he make an impact somewhere else? They got some stuff to play with. Does Klay Thompson end up going somewhere else and be kind of the veteran helper that maybe a team like the Houston Rockets could, benefit from or something like that? So they're really interesting, but it does just come down to what are we doing with Steph? And I've been a little surprised, and I'm curious about your take on this. Is it just because we have one of the all-time greats right in front of us in Steph Curry that, they just won the championship in 2022, and it feels like there's this impatient rush to just be like, well, what's next? I'm like, that might have been it. And if that's it, that is really fine to kind of be the capstone of his career. Even with the Lakers, I get it, because even the 2020 bubble was in the bubble, so fans couldn't see it in person. So it felt like it wasn't fake. That's not what I'm saying. It was a real championship that was well-deserved, but it didn't feel as real as some of the stuff that when you go to the finals and you watch it. And it was also 5 years ago almost. So now I get the LeBron kind of rush of it, but the Warriors stuff, it just feels like we just won the championship here. And there's like this impatient rush to be like, well, what are you going to do about it? Curious about your take on it.
So I think the impatience comes from, one, this team is still expensive as if it's competing for championships. And that just creates discomfort, which is understandable. Not my money, but I get that, it's easy. It's the same reason the Celtics are about to extend everybody, but last year we thought they had to trade Jaylen Brown, right? So it's like, I just saw Matt Barnes still has a cap hold for the Warriors at age 44 in the cap sheet, and that's why I said the word Barnes. I don't know why that's sitting there. Threw me off. But so that's it, right? But the other thing is I think that their development of their young guys hasn't come along. So that naturally creates kind of a, well, are we keeping them or are we moving them type of situation? And so I think it's kind of those two things together. They already displayed their nervousness or impatience themselves by trading one of those guys in Wiseman for a seventh man, eighth man in Gary Payton, right? So I think that they've kind of created that a little bit for themselves. Of course, that one paid off with a championship. But so I saw this news, Wes, with the Warriors as I was getting ready for the show and just checking on Hoops Hype and everything, the little rumors that are going around. And apparently the latest is that they might want to keep Kevon Looney after all.
Right.
Which, to me, it's only, like $7 million or something.
It's like 8, yeah.
Yeah, 8. There you go. So it's not like that tells us a ton, but it at least it raised my eyebrows just as far as really more so the Klay thing. If they're keeping Looney, does that mean they either think they're going to get Klay at even less money than they thought, or is he gone? I don't know. It just was one little kind of thing that I pinned to the whiteboard. But then I also have just been wondering, they have their own picks. You mentioned Kuminga. There's just not going to be a lot of guys available. I'm not positive if they're going to have the best offer. And I just don't really know if it's on the table for them to get whatever, the Robin to Curry's Batman might look like in 2024. I haven't really felt, reading the tea leaves or seeing any of this, like that'll be the Warriors guy. That's who it'll be. And that's going to be what they should go all in on, which I think is maybe why they've, aside from the Klay stuff, been a little bit under the radar.
Yeah, so the Klay, I'm glad you brought up the Kevon Looney part of this too, because there was a report that it felt like they were definitely going to waive him and before the guaranteed deadline, all that stuff. I always find that hard to believe just because of how much Steve Kerr loves Kevon Looney, and they do put a premium on like the team's culture. And Kevon Looney is a big part of that, and he's just sort of like a locker room leader.
It might be $8 million for culture, though.
Right.
He might not play.
No, exactly.
So it is interesting.
But I also wonder if they decide, well, we might need that $8 million to use in a trade, that they've done some calculations of the potential players that they could go after. And they're like, we know what? We need this like chunk of $8 million to include in a trade package going out. So maybe that's also part of it, especially if they think
some
that
reports
they might be
they're trying
Chris
to push
Paul.
back. Yeah, exactly. They might be trying to move his deadline back, so that would speak to a deal too. Yeah.
And I do think that that's going to happen. It just makes sense for both sides, because for Chris Paul, he's like, hey, can you move it back and we'll try to get you somewhere where you want to be. And if not, whatever. So,
man, if he were to get both years of that non-guaranteed contract guaranteed, all-time bag getting. When people thought it was basically a 2-year deal, if he gets it all the way to 4 and makes $30 million when he's almost 40 and was a bench guy last year, salute to Chris Paul.
It's almost enough to make up for the fact that he never won a championship, isn't it? Like it's
no, it's not, but it's certainly a nice consolation prize. It's 30 million consolation prizes.
Sure. 30 million reasons, and then I feel that bad about it, I guess. But they're like with the Chris Paul thing though, that's a real chip that could become something for another team to take on. Where I don't know, is that just something where the Pelicans are like, well, screw it, we can't find a good deal for Brandon Ingram, and the Warriors are like, he's not a great fit here, but it's better than nothing, and we got to do something because we're feeling the rush. And the Pelicans are like, well, we could just create basically $30 million in cap space by just taking Chris Paul for Brandon Ingram and maybe something else, and then just waiving Chris Paul, and we just call it that. Like, it could just be something like that ends up happening.
Sure.
The Warriors part of this is interesting, too. I think in terms of the rush and everything, Mike Dunleavy Jr. is in charge of that front office. He was not in charge when they won the championship in 2022. Bob Myers obviously retired or left the program after that, a year after that, but I don't think that, like, if you're now running the show there, you don't want to just kind of babysit the last dying embers of whatever it is that the Warriors championship was. Like, you want to show that, hey, I'm a real general manager. I'm not a babysitter, and I can go out and make moves and kind of give Steph Curry that chance. And Steph Curry is the franchise player. You do owe it to him, especially at the end of the season where he says, I just want to compete. I just want to win games. You know, I want to be competing at the highest level. You owe it to him to give him that opportunity, whether or not it's a championship or not. A chance to get to the Western Conference Finals, get to the second round of the Western Conference playoffs. That matters for a guy like Steph and his just competitive fire and kind of keeping that blaze alive. And I think maybe that should be the goal for the Warriors, is let's just get a chance, and then who knows? We've got Steph. He's made magic happen before. It's just really hard to find exactly what that player is, which is why maybe Jimmy Butler again has been linked to them. It's just like, hey, he's a guy that could be out there. He's a difference maker when he's engaged. You know, he could be one of the top 15 players, top 10 players in the league when he's totally engaged. And maybe the fit is a little clunky, but whatever, you know.
He's basically, aside from the consistent spot up shooting, like, he's a version of what Wiggins and Kuminga have been for them at various points. So you could obviously see how Butler could click in there. Kuminga, to me, I love Jonathan Kuminga, but anyone would have to realistically admit that even the past couple of years as he's really started to come along, he's also never really been the most consistent. It's been flashes. It's been, obviously Kerr maybe didn't do him a ton of favors with the role fluctuation over time, but still, I think if Kuminga had been consistently every night what he's been for 2, 3, 4 weeks at a time at various points, he would have gotten that role and would have been starting and would have been doing everything. So I get why
the Kuminga part is interesting. I want to, before we move off Kuminga, but
no, I was just going to say, okay. I think that I get why you would want to, maybe he kind of would have to be included, but maybe you don't have the patience, and that's sort of where, again, it always kind of comes back to that. But I think it would not shock me if he became as good as some of the players they could trade for.
I'm high on Kuminga. I don't think I'm as high on him as you are, but I do wonder what his value around the league is. Like, if you're a team trading for Jonathan Kuminga, how confident are you in bringing him in as a blue chip kind of centerpiece to a deal if you're moving a star or a high-level role player out? Because he has been inconsistent. There are concerns over his outside jumper. I think there's concerns over his defensive engagement on a night-to-night basis. There are, even in the NBA media space, I think there's people that are sort of either anti or pro Jonathan Kuminga. I would venture to guess that the front offices around the league are very similar. It kind of reflects the same thing. Either you're in or you're out on Kuminga. And so I think people see him as this former lottery pick with all this potential and this upside and say, well, they could probably make him the centerpiece of any kind of deal that they'd want. It's really going to depend on the front office's view and value of Kuminga, whether or not they view him. Fortunately for the Warriors, you do have these other things that you could potentially move. Maybe they're bigger Podziemski fans. Maybe they'd rather have that kind of deal based around him and like a Trace Jackson Davis or something like that. Like, again, eye of the beholder kind of stuff. But
yeah,
I wouldn't be surprised if Kuminga was harder to trade than I think a lot of people would expect.
All right. Anything else on the Warriors? I can take us to another bigger team here.
Is there just a player out there that you love for them, whether or not it's like gettable or not, outside of like Giannis and stuff like that?
I really don't.
That's
I really
the hardest
don't
part.
know if there is.
I know.
They're just. I mean, obviously, we know it's the Warriors. They're a unique fit. They're a tough group to
Steph
to
Curry,
click in with.
I've always said, one of the great teammates of all time, ultimate floor raiser on offense, all these things, not easy to play with. That has nothing to do with him personality-wise. It's just a weird system. He changes all like the movement patterns and stuff that you're used to playing. So it takes a very specific player to get along there.
I liked Jared Allen at very, if he were to be available, but now we got Donovan posting IG stories of the two of them hugging, so that doesn't seem to be in the cards here. I've thought about Towns, but I don't think defensively that would ever make sense. It's not like there's nobody, but it's like, as far as the stars that we think could reasonably be available, I'm not exactly sure. I kind of was intrigued by the Siakam thing when he was available. Yeah, I felt like that made some sense. He's obviously in Indiana now and just signed a new deal.
That's the one that got away, because obviously the Giannis fit. Every Warriors fan talked about that a few years ago before Giannis signed that extension and stuff. Like, can we go get him? What would it take? Would you trade Draymond and Clay to get Giannis and all these things? Pascal Siakam was sort of like baby Giannis and all the kind of things that Warriors fans were dreaming of. So is there like a baby Giannis or a baby Siakam out there? Is that just Jonathan Kuminga? I don't know. But it's not easy to find the player that makes a lot of sense. And that's kind of the roadblock I keep bumping up against, which might be why they're interesting, is because, like, can they figure it out? Because I can't.
One other one, just to throw it out there. Again, not like these aren't stars, and that's part of what's a star player. And, like, maybe salute to Kevin Durant a little bit here, right? But, like, a star player who is able to come in and sort of humble themselves to play a style that is going to be less usage and all that than they're used to, that's part of what's tough. But Mikal Bridges comes to mind. Mikal Bridges would be pretty interesting if he ever became available, just to kind of fill what we've seen Wiggins and even, to an extent KD kind of do here. Would be pretty interesting. But all right, so my next one, the Milwaukee Bucks.
I have them on my list.
Not a lot of stuff they can do, so that's why I didn't put them higher. But obviously a ton of pressure. Obviously, probably one of the bigger gaps between if they can really hit the highest end outcome of everything that they can do could be right there in the championship mix again. Whereas if they fall flat, they're first round exit again. So, and guys are getting fired or moved or whatever. So a lot at stake. Picks 23 and 33 in the draft. We've heard from Jake Fisher now of Yahoo to circle back to Brook Lopez again, that he is reportedly at least kind of on the table, which makes sense if you're just looking at their cap sheet. There's not a lot. They're not going to trade Giannis or Dame. Middleton probably has more value to them than he would anywhere else with his injuries and everything. So Lopez is naturally where you would have to look. And quietly, Wes, the other part of this that interests me, and the Bucks came up when we had Zach Cohen of Real GM last week on to talk about the draft and some teams that we were talking about sleepers, and then it was, okay, well, what teams have the most kind of pressure on them to try to get one of these sleepers and get it right? And the Bucks came up. They've been awful at drafting under John Horst. Yes. Since he took over for John Hammond, who of course drafted Giannis and is really renowned and helped build this Orlando core now too. But since he left and Horst replaced him, they've swung and missed over and over and over. And of course they haven't had a ton of, not like they swung and missed on the third overall pick by any means. It's been late picks, but hey, plenty of other teams do it. So you gotta at least get something. And it's been Sterling Brown, and it's been, Jordan Nwora, and it hasn't worked out. And now they have two guys on their roster now, Beauchamp and Jackson, who Doc didn't want to play. It seems like they're headed toward at least not hitting in Milwaukee. So if 23 and 33 are kind of their only means to improve, and those are the places that they've consistently been bad at improving with, it's pretty bleak. So I don't know if you have Lopez ideas or draft ideas, but they got to do something, and I'm not optimistic that they can.
Yeah, I think the 23 pick is important for them, but for a team with championship aspirations, expecting even a hit at 23 to meaningfully bump up your championship odds is just unrealistic. But they do have to use it and make something of it. Eventually, at some point, you got to start hitting on these draft picks, whether or not you have Giannis or Brook Lopez or Damian Lillard. Like, the draft matters. You got to start figuring that part of it out, just from your own job, from John Horst's job's perspective. Mm-hmm. The Brook Lopez is obvious. He's obviously the domino here. He's the big kind of chip that they could play. He makes sense for a lot of teams. Even at going into his age 36 season, it's an expiring contract. You can move that. To me, I thought that they should, and apparently they want to move him and kind of get more versatile defensively. I thought they should have been targeting Nick Claxton at the trade deadline last year. I think that would be a slam dunk fit for them. You no longer have Drew Holiday there. You've got Damian Lillard. I think it makes a lot of sense to switch to a switching style of defense where you can kind of unlock Giannis in that way a little bit more than he has been in the past, maybe. And then if you get a guy like Claxton, maybe that unlocks that scheme for you. It gets a little bit harder to pull that deal off. It would take a restricted free agency sign and trade type of thing, which is possible. It would hard cap them, but that's sort of like their own finances. Do they think they're going to go over that hard cap, all these things? But something like that to me makes some sense.
Well, the Pelicans have been connected to Lopez for obvious reasons. Zion's a very similar player to Giannis. Having a spacing five, like we talked about, would make a lot of sense. And so Larry Nance could be that, right? Larry Nance could make sense for Milwaukee. So I think like a Nance and Daniels move for Lopez, I think the Bucks probably have to give more in that deal, actually. So I don't know what it ends up looking like, just given that Lopez is making a lot of money and is older and everything else. So, but maybe my favorite fake trade, and I think probably the Bucks have to give something on this one, is Lopez for Dort.
Oh, I hate that for Oklahoma City.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. Lou Dort's awesome. And I know they just got Caruso, and maybe you don't need him, but that's sort of the idea is I feel like when you have one of them, it's fine, but when you have two of them, it's impenetrable. Right? And that it's like building on the strength is almost the point of adding Caruso. It wasn't to make Dort redundant. And so I've been on this the whole time. I don't think that the Thunder need a $20 million a year center. I think they just need a guy who's 7 feet tall that can come off the bench and get him at $5 million in free.
Well, if they happen to have a guy who happens to make $20 million because he had a great career and got overpaid by his team and is going to expire soon, and they have the money, it's kind of like, why not? Like, they're not going out of their way to spend their own money on a $20 million center, but I think he probably would be fine coming off the bench. I don't know. I think not to get sidetracked with OKC, but I'm still skeptical about I think shooting is what kind of bit them in the postseason, and they haven't really addressed that. So Lopez would do that, even if it's not even so much to me like they need toughness and size. It's really like Lopez is a volume shooter. He just happens to play center. So that's kind of why I liked it. But the Bucks also have the taxpayer MLE, so that just to say that they can go try to outbid for somebody, whether that's a center or another wing, because they're only in the first apron, which shocked me. I thought they were in the second apron, so they have a little more than the minimum if they want to do that too.
I like Lopez for Oklahoma City. I want to be clear. I just wouldn't trade Dort for him. But you've got like all these draft picks and these other things that you could move, and you could absorb Lopez into cap space if that's what you're trying to do. And then maybe that's what Milwaukee looks for, because now you become more of a, you get the non-taxpayer mid-level exception. You get all that kind of stuff unlocked. Maybe I don't know. I know we're trying to figure out the Milwaukee part of this, not the Oklahoma City part of this.
But there's not a lot of trades for Lopez, I think, is maybe the thing to just say from the Bucks side is like he makes a lot of money.
Would you do, and I'm just thinking, I'm putting my Miami Heat hat on here. If you just need shooting, because that's the other thing you need around Giannis is shooting, would you do Duncan Robinson for Brook Lopez? Maybe you have to throw something else in there, but like as the basis, like does that do anything for you?
Well, Doc seemed to love what's his name, AJ Green. They played him a lot once Doc took over. So maybe Doc thinks they need like a movement shooter like that, which I don't hate, but I think I would need. It goes back to the part of why I like made a point of the thing with Ingram at the top of these teams who, and of course Lopez isn't even as good as Ingram, but good teams who want to trade their established players for multiple component parts, but who are also contributing role players. That type of trade is just. There's a reason when Toronto, they did it with Kawhi, they did it with, obviously I mentioned the OG trade in the other direction last time, but there's a reason that those moves are like, the Raptors get such a reaction for. They're just not common, but now a lot of teams want them. So Brook kind of falls in that camp too. It's like, yeah, Lopez, Fernandez, and Daniels sounds great, but that type of deal happens like once a year. So are we really going to get 6 of them this summer? I kind of doubt it. So I don't know. Chris and I have gone back and forth with the Bucks thing a million times. Like it does feel like they're really just up against it. It might be more likely that, hey, they just make a pick of 23-33 and use the taxpayer MLE, hope Dame's healthy, and roll it back.
Yeah, hope that Dame's in shape, I guess, according to Doc Rivers. But no, they're the team last year. Like, you ever watch like a TV show? I think like in Succession, for instance. Were you a Succession guy?
Oh yeah.
So it always felt like Kendall would have like this great scheme, and he was like, I'm way ahead of everybody on this. Like, nobody sees I'm playing chess, not checkers, baby. And he does this whole thing, and he executes all these things, and it just, Logan was there just beating him the entire time, seeing what came in. Like, his whole thing just fell apart at the end of the episode, right? That's what the Milwaukee Bucks whole year felt like, is we're getting Damian Lillard. Nobody sees us coming, man. We're that mystery team that's been hinted at. Nobody sees it coming. We got Damian Lillard. Boom. We've won the offseason. It was really tough to say goodbye to Drew Holiday. Wait, Drew? Wait, we thought we sent him to Portland. Why is he in Boston now? Wait, did we just somehow lose the arms race on this entire thing? And they were like the Kendall Roy of the offseason, and the Bucks were the Logan Roy, just sort of masterminding the entire thing. They obviously didn't know that Drew was going to be available all these things, but whatever. That's not the point. The point is a metaphor. Yeah. But it feels like they are that team, and I don't know that Kendall Roy ever gets out of his own way. You know what I mean? And that's sort of where I'm at, is you failed the arms race at a very pivotal point in your build, in sort of your timeline, and you've sort of now boxed yourself into whatever this is, which is why, to go back to the Brook Lopez piece, it's like kind of the last thing there to kind of move. And if you don't get it right, it will be a disaster, because there might not be any coming back from it. Because just hoping that your aging stars are healthier than they've been in a long time and have all career years at the same time, I guess is a fine strategy, but it's not the best one. And it felt like you were operating from a place where you just won a championship in 2022, where you shouldn't be here now. And it does feel a little bit more bleak than you'd want it to be for the Bucks.
They just got so old. They're just so
right.
old.
And
because Dame, like, that's the part of it where it's like another guy where, okay, yeah, like I agree. It was funny to hear Doc like lay the breadcrumbs of the excuse like he tends to, but it's like, well, what did you expect? You acquired another dude in his mid-30s. It's like, were you surprised Middleton barely made it through the regular season? Well, you can't really be surprised that Dame not being in awesome shape all summer was a problem for you. You got all these dudes who are on their last contract. Like, that's what happens, you know? And that's why I pointed out, like, yeah, they're probably not going to get somebody at 23 that demonstrably makes them this favorite out of nowhere. But it just speaks to, like, could they get one? It'd be nice, you know?
It'd be nice if they had hit the pick a couple years ago, to your point earlier. It's almost too late now to hit on the pick. It almost is inconsequential to hit on the pick. But they have to do it anyway, because that's their job, and they've done such a bad job about it anyway. But does Middleton have zero value on the trade market?
I think he has negative value.
That's what I'm thinking too. He's 31.6 this year, $34 million on a player option, which I'm going to assume he's going to pick that one up in 2025.
Yeah.
It's like
you'd have to give something to get off of him at this point. Would be how I look at it, just because of his injury concerns. Like, you're acquiring a guy who you have guaranteed money for 2 years, $65 million, who, you know, it sucks. I love Chris Middleton. He actually played awesome in the postseason, which would make me, if I'm Milwaukee at least, and I kind of know I probably have to keep him, a little bit optimistic. But if I'm another team, it's like he may not play. You know, that's a real possibility that I'm getting no performance out of him. So, just last thing on the Bucks.
I wonder if there's a front office like a Houston Rockets that just feels internal pressure to make something happen, and maybe they just move like a Dylan Brooks and a Steven Adams salary for Chris Middleton, and you just sort of break that one spot up into a couple spots. But like you said, those trades are hard. It's a great point. Yeah. And I'm with you. I think Middleton probably has negative value, but there's, you know, teams have done weird things in the past.
Yeah, and, you know, maybe it's like, again, maybe next summer he could be more movable on the last year.
Are you exploring it at least? Are you making calls if you're Milwaukee?
Of course. I would have been making calls for the past year on Middleton, unfortunately for him, but, you know, it's dicey. And they know more about his medicals than anybody. It's been so weirdly handled. Like, I can't. I just would be such a risk if you're another team.
My only hesitation would be, well, we just traded away one of Giannis's favorite teammates ever, and we're gonna do it again to try to But now we're sort of in scramble mode in doing it. Does that rub Giannis the wrong way if it doesn't work out? Would just be like the one thing I would be worried about.
If they trade the pick, I would just, they have Portis and Connaughton, who they can also deal. I think Portis was just not very good last year, frankly. So his defense has always been questionable. I think it took a step back. If he's not creating offense and shooting threes at a really high level consistently, then he just starts to become tough to even play in a playoff environment. So you have to see, bounce back, whatever, but can another team take him on? And that's just the salary to go out and get something else. So they don't have nothing to work with, but they don't have a lot. All right. What's your last team here?
Those are the teams I was most excited to talk about. But I think the other one, I want to shout out the Denver Nuggets a little bit. I don't know that they're my next most interesting team, but I think it's fun to kind of say, oh, well, how these kind of middling teams take the next steps. Just as interesting to me on that kind of stuff, and then like the legacy teams like the Warriors and the Lakers and stuff, is these top teams that need to make one little move but don't have much means to do it. But obviously the Denver Nuggets, they need to do something. It's hard for them to do anything. How can they sort of work around the parameters and their limitations to go find that backcourt upgrade, a backup center, things like that? What are they going to do in the draft? How are they going to use these picks? How are they going to negotiate the timeline and the salaries and all these things? I don't know what move is on the board for the Nuggets. It just feels like they need a version of what the Mavericks did last year, where they hit on a couple of minimum salary guys, and they just need to do a better job of scouting those guys. But also, Booth has said, we're not trying to repeat a bunch of times. We're trying to win multiple in a decade. Well, congrats. You didn't repeat. So,
mission accomplished.
Yeah, nailing the plan so far. Yeah. But now is like that other, if it's going to be like an every other year kind of thing, well, here's your every other year. You got to make a run at it this time, because now you just, if you're not in the finals this year, now you just become a team that won one, right? Mm-hmm. And it's not to say that you'll never win another one, but you got to get to that level again. And, it felt like they took a year trying to groom the young guys. None of them really panned out yet. I mean, Christian Brown is probably the most promising of the whole group, but I don't know that anybody else is proven at this point. Do you go and say, you know what, we tried developing these guys, maybe they just ain't it. Let's go get some minimum salary veterans who might be a little bit more proven and can help us in the short term and make a move that way, because now you're on the clock a little bit more than you were coming off of the championship.
Yeah, it's really fascinating what is going to happen with KCP, of course, right? Like first and foremost with them, because of course, if they lose him, it is pretty dire. It's a disaster. Yeah. At the same time, just from kind of mathing it out, like if they did lose him, they get more flexibility, so they become somewhat more interesting in other ways. Of course, for them, that doesn't matter, and it shouldn't. But I would kind of just be to game out what it would look like for them to have to go into kind of panic mode would be kind of interesting to watch. But I want this group to stay together. I think they can keep KCP on a little bit of a raise, but a longer contract type of thing, just to kind of reward him for what he's done. He's 31, so he's not going to get too many more cracks at this. So they gotta pay him up, but maybe not too much. I don't know. We'll see, but. Them giving Reggie Jackson that contract was awful last year, and they can't afford a mistake like that again.
The Michael Porter Jr. part of this, too, is interesting, because when you're talking about, again, you move the big salary for a couple of pieces, that might be a way to address their depth. If you're looking at one part of the starting five, one member who might be the most expendable, it might be Michael Porter Jr., especially if you're able to bring back Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, because you're going to need his shooting. Can you turn the MPJ piece, who is a good player? I'm not out on MPJ, but at $36 million, probably not that good. Could you turn that salary into something that makes a little bit more sense for you and provides a little bit more depth and financial flexibility moving forward? I've got a fake trade idea for you if you'd like to hear it.
Sure.
Michael Porter Jr. to Memphis for Marcus Smart, John Conchar, and G.G. Jackson.
I think you threw that one to me after the Nuggets got eliminated, and
did I?
I joked that G.G. Jackson would become an all-star at age 20 in Denver if that were to happen. Okay, I mean, a 6'9" scoring athletic freak. That's the league should. David Stern should come back up and join us again to cut that one off, because that seems like cheating. MPJ. I don't know. People like Matt Moore, who covers them. Obviously, based in Denver, works for the Action Network. He has been referring to that a lot as like one of the most unmovable deals in the NBA. I'm not fully sure I agree with him.
Yeah.
But he's talking to more people that would know than me. So maybe it is seen that way around the league.
I get it.
It's not so much 36 this year, but it's 41 3 years from now. You know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's tough, but he's young, he's tall, and he can shoot the snot out of the ball. And those guys tend to be able to get moved. Yeah, I mean it's different than Zach LaVine, who's old and not that big and shoots the snot out of the ball. Like, and that's sort of the comparison I've seen is Michael Porter Jr. Is that just another Zach LaVine salary? I'm like, nah, it's not that bad.
Okay, I got one last one for us.
Let's do it.
Close out. Utah Jazz.
Okay.
Basically, the idea being that I'm just fascinated, and I've been thinking about them a lot for obvious reasons in the aftermath of Boston winning the title, because Danny Ainge is now in Utah, as is one of the assistant coaches, who's now the head coach there, and Will Hardy. And we're just basically seeing, Wes, what it looks like for Danny Ainge to orchestrate a rebuild without the KG Pierce deal.
Right.
You know?
Yes. I was thinking about that the other day. Yeah.
What would it look like if you
be bad?
Yeah, if you didn't just get gifted a top 5 pick every year, regardless of how your team performed. Now that's what Danny Ainge is having to navigate, and it's just crazy that I think that a lot of their moves and their, the way they play and the way they've been able to get more out of some of their young players has been like they're kind of basketball nerd, a good smart team in those circles, despite not being very good on the court, and yet. I look up and there's these rumors that Walker Kessler could be available, which it seems like one of those things that's probably not going to happen, but just kind of pops up this time of year if I had to guess, but still odd. And it just made me, again, be thinking about them from the standpoint of how many core players do they have? How many guys are on their roster that we know are going to be on their roster in 3 years, 5 years? You could tell me the answer is 0. I don't. You think, so that's crazy. They've been bad for 2 years. They've been, the chosen son of NBA rebuilds and everything. But then they have 0 players to show for that. That's what happens when you're not picking 3, but you're picking 10 and everything else. This feels like a summer that they kind of need to maybe get to 1. You know what I mean? And maybe that's just extending Markkanen and saying Lauri Markkanen is going to be on our team. And we're going to start building around Markkanen and not just having him be the one good thing on a bad team. Or we're trading Markkanen and we're actually going to be awful this year. But I just like this doesn't feel like it's working.
They're another one of these Vision Quest teams, aren't they? It's just, hey, you got to go out this summer and figure something out. You got to pick a path and go down it. And the Lauri Markkanen thing is interesting because, Danny Ainge will tell everybody, like, we're not trading Lauri Markkanen. He's a key part of the team. It's like, well, you said the same thing about Donovan Mitchell and Rudy Gobert, and you traded them within minutes of saying that. So I don't believe it. But he's also up for an extension. You have to make some kind of decision on Markkanen at some point, and just playing like this loosey-goosey limbo thing isn't working, to your point. I like Keontae George. I think he's a piece. I don't know that he's their star going forward, but I thought he had a good year last year, and he made strides as a playmaker, which was not necessarily his job, and all these things, and I thought he was good. But I don't really know what you do with this team, especially like the Walker Kessler thing is really interesting to me because weren't we a year away from Utah Jazz people being like, would you rather have Walker Kessler or Rudy Gobert? That was a real conversation.
I was so high on him. Yeah. And Jake Fisher reported on the Dunked On podcast that they were both kind of talking about it, I believe, or I don't actually remember. Maybe it wasn't them. But either way, Jake reported it initially, and it seems like there's some kind of tension between like how he's playing and his minutes and with the coaching staff, which honestly to me, like the way that I took that is, he probably didn't appreciate coming off the bench for as long as he did.
Right. Yeah.
Really, I'm not sure what reason, because you really wanted to have John Collins around and you benched your foundational center. Like, I kind of blame the Jazz on that. I don't know the details, but that was weird from afar, and if it bothered him, even worse.
The John Collins trade was weird in the first place, where I understood it from like a talent bet, but also why. For the Jazz, it's like, what? So John Collins, it's not like you're doing a talent bet on a guy who's 21, 22. Like, John Collins is not old, but he's not like was this going to be the
It was almost like a fit bet.
Yeah, it was very strange. And
it's like, can he work better here? But he's probably not going to get better as a player. It's just like, could it work here? But yeah, it disrupted a lot.
You did, and I understand he was making $29 million, and Kessler was in the second year of his contract, and it's like, well, if we're going to bench one of them, I guess we bench the cheaper, younger guy. It didn't make any sense. And so now the Jazz have to correct course. I don't think the Kessler thing is a lost cause. I would be working to find a way to put him back in the starting lineup and smooth things over with him because I do think he's still I'm high on him as well. You just got to figure something out. So it's a good who knows what that looks like. Maybe it just looks like a straight up bottoming out. Maybe that's what you have to do, or you're moving some of these young pieces, including a Kessler, and getting a guy who's more on Lauri Markkanen's and John Collins, I guess, their timeline. And going in that direction. But you got it, like I said, Vision Quest summer for the Utah Jazz. Figure out what you want to do, be that team, and go forward. Because you can only be like cool, hardy, 5-out offense, cool schemes, and sideline out of bounds stuff for so long before you actually have to start winning games.
Yeah, and they have new ownership and everything else. So, bringing Ainge in and kind of being the flashy, interesting team for a while and winning the Mitchell and Gobert trades like that buys you some job security. But they've also quietly been in on trade? Yeah, I don't.
Because they got rid of a young top 15 player going into his prime, having the best 2 years of his career in Cleveland, and they don't have a whole lot to show for that trade.
Well, Markkanen.
Okay.
But he's not as good as Mitchell,
one of the best 15 players in the league. I mean, it's not nearly as good as Mitchell. But,
and they just traded out Ochai Agbaji for no real reason last year to get, send him to Toronto, which was, he's not as good as Kessler, but another one where it's like, hold on, he was like one of the things you got in the deal, and now he's not on your team anymore. Like, why? Yeah. All right. That was all my list, and I think you burned through yours, so there we go.
So I've got one thing for you before we sign off here. We're recording this on a Sunday morning, typically prime time for brunch. And so I'm going to ask you the age-old question. Waffles or pancakes?
So I have a story actually on this because I had a weird thing yesterday. So my little sister is 9 years younger than me. My mom buys like health food. Not crazy, but like, not going to have like Lucky Charms in the pantry and bacon on the stove. Just sort of like, a touch healthier of an option. A Sprouts instead of instead of a
got it.
Instead of a regular grocery store, Trader Joe's, maybe not Whole Foods level, but you know what I mean. So she had never been to Denny's. My little sister had never in her life been to a Denny's.
Wow.
So I was like, okay, let's go to Denny's. You gotta come on. She just graduated from high school. She's a grown adult. She's gotta go. She's gotta have that experience. So
you took her by yourself, or was your mom also involved?
Took her by myself.
Okay. Wow.
My mom probably
behind
would
your
never.
Mom's back. Does she know?
She knows. It was allowed. It was approved. She's also an adult. She can make her own decisions. I don't know if she's willing to get into some tension with her, her mother over that. But she could have come. So, but no, my mom would never step foot. So it was just the two of us.
Oh wow.
And. One, I don't even think Denny's makes waffles. So that became a talking point, which is what made me think of this.
That's a hard stance. That's in the waffle versus pancake debate. Denny's is very much like we don't even sell the waffles.
They're kind of an authority on the matter, and they seem to have chosen their side. So I don't know what that tells us here, but they had a million types of pancakes. So I went. I got some. She did. My little sister did as well. So. I feel like most of the time at a restaurant, I'm pancakes because they have you can do more with it. You can do banana and chocolate chip, or you could do peanut butter or some kind of like caramely thing. Waffles, it's kind of like you're just getting a waffle. That's But then at home, I'm all waffles. Like I'll make waffles, I'll get frozen waffles. I never would have a pancake at my house, so I don't know where that leaves me. I actually don't know my own answer here.
So usually we do on the Instagram posts, we pick out some quotes to post on Instagram, and I think yours needs to be at home, I'm all waffles.
That's me. That's all anybody needs to know about me. There you go.
That's your video. Most interesting teams in the offseason. At home, I'm all waffles.
Yeah, there we go.
I'm waffle through and through. So my thing, when it comes down to it, I don't like syrup. I'm anti-syrup. It's just a sugary, globby, glazy mess, and it makes me want to puke, honestly. It grosses me out.
All right.
I don't know if that's partly just because at Denny's, the syrup container always feels like a syrup container in that it's sticky and nasty, and I hate it, and I don't even want to touch it, so that might just be part of it.
You got the weird little you got to push it so that it opens, and then it's kind of
it
hard
barely
to get
opens.
it to come out.
You just got like
Exactly.
it's just got syrup trying to keep it closed. It doesn't. We're in the year 2024. We have to have found a better way to deliver syrup to pancakes other than that.
They have like at
device.
some little restaurants or hotels, they'll have like the ranch container, but it has syrup in it. That's honestly better. It works better.
You go to a fast food restaurant, you have ketchup packets. Why not have individual syrup packets and just you use it and toss it and we're done. Anyway, not to give out free ideas to Denny's, but I like waffles.
So you don't like syrup,
waffles.
but you like waffles. So what do you put on it?
Just like butter is fine, or by itself, honestly, like just a dry waffle. Just
okay, that is what's the difference? Like just eat toast at that point.
I don't eat either of these very often ever.
Okay,
but I like the texture part that I get with the waffle. You have the crunchy outside and the soft inside. With a pancake, it's just all soft, and I'm very much a texture guy. So I go, and I'm not a sweets person at all. So there's nothing really that I could do with either of these items. So if I had to pick anything, I would take the texture thing.
If a pancake is too thick, that's disgusting.
I also am more of a savory guy, and so you don't really hear of chicken and pancakes, but you do get chicken and waffles at a brunch. That's
true. I was gonna say, frankly, a lot of the time, if there's a restaurant that has it, French toast is a strong option.
French toast is not a fair. It's not a fair. It's a heavyweight versus a featherweight in the pancakes versus waffles debate. It's just like
because that's the thing, right? Like we were just saying, what do you even put on it if you don't like syrup? You could eat French toast without anything because it has like cinnamon sugar kind of like pressed into it already. So that's
French toast with like sliced strawberries and bananas on top. There is nothing wrong with that. There is nothing wrong with that.
Perfect meal.
Yep.
So you asked me a question that led to you not liking basically either one.
Yeah.
What do you order at brunch then?
I'm not a big brunch person. I'll usually get there, and I'll probably just order a hamburger. I'll order a cheeseburger. I just kind of go straight to the lunch portion of it. The only rough part of it is you're at brunch, you kind of want a mimosa, and it's weird to have a mimosa with a cheeseburger, but it also hasn't stopped me.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of the point of brunch. You're allowed to kind of do what you want. Like so, you could have like coffee. It's kind of weird to have like a coffee drink with like a club sandwich, but hey, that's the point.
An espresso martini and a turkey club ain't bad. Can speak from experience. But me and my wife went to brunch the other day, and we ended up just ordering waffles and beer, and I was just like, well, this is just lunch now, and it's just us drinking on a Sunday. But whatever.
That's perfect. I thought you were going to ask me an NFL question. You were setting up the Sunday morning, and I was like, I'm not ready to be in that space yet, Wes. Please don't.
Well, you're on the West Coast, so you get the great, the 10 a.m. start, which is what I miss about living in California, was you would start with, there was a restaurant near me when I used to live in the Bay Area that did like a brunch, and this is not rare, but they did it, like brunch on Sundays. So you would walk in, you would get your table, you'd start with your mimosas or your coffee, alcoholic coffee drinks. You would get your waffles or your pancakes or your eggs and all that stuff, and you would just watch the 10 o'clock games. And then by the time the 1 o'clock games came around, it was lunchtime, and then you're ordering your chicken wings and your nachos and your burgers, and you just stay there all day. And then all the games are over. You could still go to dinner. Or you could still watch the 4 o'clock game and then go to dinner after that.
Yep. Sunday night football is over. Well, it splits the year because Arizona's stupid, but we have it for half the year at least.
Right.
And Sunday night football is over by like 8 o'clock at night.
Yeah, it's great. I miss it so much. I miss it. It's the only thing.
And you get to bed at a normal time. You could do something if you want. You're not. Football is legitimately all day, but it doesn't take you into midnight or whatever, like some, the East Coast
and then we're
has,
just
so
in the East Coast, we're just like we sit around until 1 o'clock.
You're just twiddling your thumbs.
Just start it. Yeah, just go. I mean, it gives you an opportunity in the morning to go to the store and do all your shopping and stuff like that. So Sunday morning becomes errand day, but yeah, I would much rather it start earlier. That was way better.
All right, so my pullout quote is: "At home, I'm all waffles." We talked about a bunch of teams that Chris doesn't like. This was a very successful episode of the Just Basketball Show. We'll be back Wednesday leading into the NBA draft. We will be here Friday after both rounds, both days, which is the thing we're doing for some reason, of the full NBA draft. So keep it right here. Follow or subscribe if you haven't already. We'll be giving you episodes all through this crazy week and beyond. And we will talk to you next time.